Every 90 seconds, someone is reported missing. Many return to their families, but for others, something has gone seriously wrong. A 22-year-old woman has gone missing after a Christmas party.
It's a nightmare that you've lived with. A phone call in the early hours.
The family of Lorraine Benson received a call that she hadn't arrived.
What happens in the police investigation that follows?
Uniform officers had a gut instinct that something was wrong. There are other cases of similar women that have been attacked.
What happens to the family at its heart?
Can't believe you're living through the anxiety. It just wasn't happening.
When missing turns to murder.
God, he's a handsome devil, isn't he, Daddy? Not as good looking as my mummy, though. Smile at me, Mummy. Not at me. That's it, yes, hello.
You are on camera.
The red light's on, is it?
The red light's
You're
on.
going to hear that throughout the whole of the video, because everyone's being saying, it's a red light on.
Oh, goodness
It's a red
me.
light on.
That cut. Obscene.
Are we still on?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, really? John, thank you for coming down for my 21st. That's all right, Lorraine.
Well, she was our third, our youngest. Lorraine was very independent. She was our daughter, and that was it.
Loved her friends, loved going out, parties, loved kids, animals, especially her tortoise.
She seemed to have time for everybody.
Loved her sisters. She loved everybody, really.
Through school, didn't know quite what she wanted to do, but you knew she'd find her level sooner or later, which she did. And she suddenly found photography and got herself a good camera. Took a lot of pictures, got herself a job. She was in her element, really, just taking pictures all day. Living her life, she had it about right. It's a cliche, but she was fun-loving.
In the morning, she said, I'm off to work. Party later on. She loved Christmas.
5 days before celebrating Christmas with her family, Lorraine Benson is off to her work's Christmas party.
All right, have a good time. And she always rang whenever she was out to let us know where she was.
About 8:30 at night, we were sitting in the front room there, and the phone went. Picked the phone up, it was Lorraine. She said, hello, Dad. She says, she said, I won't be home tonight. She said, I'm going to Lotta's. Lotta was the mother of one of her friends, Peter. Peter's off to Australia on a gap year. And she said, I'm going, and I just cheer him off. She said, don't worry about me. She said, I haven't got work in the morning. So like kiss down the phone, and that was that. We went to bed, and it was 1:20, the phone went. As any parent would say, it's a nightmare that you've lived with. A phone call in the early hours. I woke up and it was Lotta. She said, is Lorraine with you? I said, don't be silly. I said, she's coming to you. She said, she's not here. She said, well, when she got to Rains Park, she said, she did ring me. Peter was supposed to meet her at Rains Park, but he got caught up with a couple of mates and they were having a drink because obviously he was going away. And as he wasn't there, Lotta said, don't worry, I'll get the car and come and get you. And then Lorraine turned around and said, don't worry. She said, I can walk. It's only about a mile along Coombe Road. Even late at night, it's bright and open. She began walking down Coombe Road to get to Holland Avenue. It's, I don't know what the mileage, 1 mile, whatever it is.
The family of Lorraine Benson received a call from her friend's house, who she was going to visit that night, that she hadn't arrived. They were obviously concerned and called the police. It's 30 years in December since I've been here, and things have changed considerably. It brings back all kinds of memories. When Lorraine went missing, it was just before Christmas. She had in fact been to a Christmas party that night.
In December of 1988, I was the sole female detective constable working at Wimbledon Police Station in South London. And I was appointed to be the family liaison officer when there was a report of a missing young lady. My natural reaction was, why? Why do you require CID now? That is so unusual. If an adult is reported missing, then normally 24 hours would be left before a formal investigation would be launched. Normally, the last you'd hear of somebody in those circumstances was when they've gone to a party or something like that. More often than not, especially at that time of year, they would have gone to a friend's house, been too worst aware. It would not be escalated as a serious case for 24 hours unless there was some unusual information. The uniform officers had a gut instinct that something was wrong. She'd made that phone call to say, I'm at the train station, my friend hasn't come to meet me, I've got a short walk to go. And it was just one road, one long main road to walk. It would have taken 10 minutes for a fit person to walk the distance to her friend's house.
All the circumstances, the phone call a short time before to say, I'm just up the road, I'll be there, and not turning up. The fact that the friend hadn't met her when was supposed to, that she was walking alone quite late at night, I think it was early in the morning.
It was that gut instinct where the DI, Detective Inspector, actually then urged me to spend time and try and find out as much as possible. And to get my initial reaction, did I think that this actually warranted more investigation or not?
Officers at Wimbledon Police Station had a very good reason to be concerned about Lorraine's disappearance.
There were other cases of similar women that had been attacked very close by. And that would have been in the back of his mind.
In Kingston, the police had started a major inquiry with a team of detectives looking into a series of rapes, which is just the border of which is just around the corner from where we are now.
It was stressed to me that they felt that there was more to this and that we should start investigations early.
Inspector Wayne Henry was the duty officer that night, and he deployed his team to carry out an area search to look for Lorraine. They would carry out as many inquiries as they could in the darkness to either establish what had happened or to find Lorraine.
The police's only source of information are Mick and Lynn Benson and Peter's mother, Lotta.
The demeanour of the parents and the mother of the friend where Lorraine was supposed to arrive, those things were all very early indicators that this was beyond the normal.
When Lotta told me what was going on, I went over there. Strangely, when I walked in, there were 2 police constables already in there.
And then really it was down to me as the liaison officer to sit down with them and try to actually evidence in writing what was at that time a gut instinct, to try and glean as much information from them and put pen to paper to convince more senior officers that this truly was a serious case.
And I said to the officer then, I said, I've always been pro-police. I said, but there's not even a crime to be seen yet. I said, and you're on the case. And he turned around and he said, this last few months, there have been so many sexual assaults. The first sign I talked with one, he said, we're out.
With little to go on, officers keep an open mind about what may have happened to Lorraine.
In any case where a young girl goes missing, the father is normally questioned quite closely.
And the police officer said, we go out and look for her. We ended up in the car, went back to Rains Park. It turns out that the father is usually the main suspect. So in retrospect, they just stand back.
I've been involved in interviewing parents and loved ones before, where in fact, at the back of your mind, you know that they are the culprit.
It was when you start looking for her, you are aware that you're in front. They're not leading you, but they're waiting for you to go somewhere you shouldn't go and then go, oh, look what I've found.
It's the early hours of December the 20th, 1988. Police are searching for Lorraine Benson, who hasn't arrived at a friend's house after a work Christmas party. This has been made a high-risk missing persons case because of recent attacks in the local area. Everyone close to Lorraine is thoroughly investigated.
In any case where a young girl goes missing, the father is normally questioned quite closely.
At the back of your mind, you know that they are the culprit.
But he was eliminated quite early on because he was in a different part of London when Lorraine was missing.
The police's attention turns to the man Lorraine was supposed to be meeting.
Lorraine's friend Peter, that was supposed to meet her at the station, was also arrested.
Colleagues who spoke to Peter told me that obviously his reactions were, of course, just devastated to start with, confusion as to why he'd been arrested, moving on to understanding why he would be a suspect, back to anger, why was he the suspect, why weren't they actually finding the real suspect, and the concentration of police activity around his house, knowing that Lorraine was out there somewhere, and yet his house was being searched from top to toe for clues by police officers in front of all the neighbours.
Peter was eventually eliminated from the inquiry.
He was exonerated very early on the inquiry, fortunately for him, and he turned out to actually be a sterling person that supported the family throughout. The number one priority is to find Lorraine, whether at that point Mick or any of the family were the suspects, or whether it was somebody else who was a suspect. The key priority always is to focus on where is Lorraine. I sat down with Mick with a map of Wimbledon, and we actually chatted through the route Lorraine would have taken. I then took that map through to Detective Inspector Benham and explained to him, this is where I think the search should start, and he agreed with me. DI Benham then briefed a uniform team who specialised in searching. They were slowly traced back along the main road first, from A to B, the most direct route, and then down the side roads.
Officers on the night established this scene. It was a torchlight search by the officers in the vicinity that they knew Lorraine would be walking, and that's when they found her property.
In that first initial walkthrough of the main road of Combe Lane, an item of jewellery was found.
Police officer says, has she got a hooped earring? A leather hooped earring?
Showed it to Mick to ask him whether he recognised it. Initially he didn't. He phoned Lynn at home, his wife.
No, I said to Lynn, has Lorraine got a leather hooped earring? So she said no. Initially,
Relief. It's not hers. And I could see the relief on Mick's face. No, it's okay, it's not hers. And almost you could see he was convincing himself that actually, no, that's fine, discard that. Whew. Let's move on. And then the phone call back.
Said, I think she's borrowed mine, Mick.
No, I did lend her a pair of my earrings. She realised, in fact, it was a pair of her own earrings that she'd lent Lorraine. And that change to one of complete despair and that reinforcement of worry and complete helplessness.
The police officer said, I think you better come over. We were taken straight to this carport, and he shone his torch down. Nothing there looked like Lorraine. And then he moved the torch a little bit on the earring. Lynn said, I think that's my earring. So the police officer said, well, we better move away, you know, you're going to start treading on evidence.
The earring was actually emotionally a very difficult time for both Mick and Lynn.
Please let her be found and she's alive. She's okay. Just couldn't believe it was happening.
That was the first clue that we were on the right path of the direction that Lorraine had gone in. And the next items that were found were a bag with a change of clothes. It was a key driver for then going back out, geeing on the search team to say, we're getting there, guys.
When Lorraine's items had been found, the scene has to be kept sterile. So an officer would be placed to keep anybody else from going in to contaminate the scene. The officer in charge would have requested the forensic teams to be called from Scotland Yard, and then in the day, the local forensic officers, in those days they were termed SOCOs, scenes of crimes officers, then they would have come along to assist at the scene as well.
They went back and it was even fine, a more detailed search.
Forensics teams turned up that on the car that was parked at the end of the alleyway behind me, there were some disturbance marks where it had been there for some time. The dust had all congregated on the door, and that had been disturbed.
But also, more crucially, found very close to the car was a discarded handkerchief.
The handkerchief had blood. There was also saliva and mucus debris. Items that are seized are put into forensic bags and sealed so that there can be no cross-contamination.
A forensic scientist always needs to have an open mind, particularly in the investigative stages of a case. Is there something else on the item or in the evidence that may be worth looking at? With this case, it was allocated to me because I was already dealing with a series of rapes which had occurred in the Kingston area, and it was thought that the cases may be linked.
We had bags and bags and bags and bags of pieces.
At that stage, we never knew what we'd found that would be of any benefit anywhere.
With the forensics team hard at work, their investigating colleagues are hunting for more clues and witnesses.
The inquiry continued with house-to-house inquiries to establish what people had seen, and witnesses on Coombe Lane behind me had heard noises, screams that they thought was just a drunken fight.
She had a very distinctive long white Mac she'd just bought herself. As they pieced it together, there was a bus driver who remembered Lorraine. He said he was driving down, he said there was a young lady in a long white coat walking very purposefully.
Another witness had seen her being supported by a man by the roundabout further along Coombe Lane.
One person come out the door when she heard two people arguing. He heard this argument between boy and girl, thought they were a courting couple, could very well have been Lorraine. So that was a sighting that the police were working on. It would appear that Lorraine got to within about 40 yards of Lotta's front door when she was attacked.
And we know that Lorraine never reached a destination, and forensics have confirmed struggles along the way.
It would appear he went off in front of her, then got to where Lorraine was going and jumped out of this alleyway that he was in, a little carport. Stunned Lorraine with a blow to the head. Then he's half dragged, half carried her up the street. People saw this going on, but it was Christmas. They thought it was boyfriend and girlfriend and she'd had too much to drink.
Looked like she was being helped, maybe struggling a little bit, but nobody actually reported that. I mean, they didn't think it was anything out of ordinary. It's the 19th of December, a lot of merriment going on, and nobody should feel guilty about not actually taking second heed of what they saw. Crucial pieces of evidence were found in that fine fingertip search, which included the earring. That confirmed she was definitely walking that route back. The handkerchief that was discarded nearby, that handkerchief had evidence on it.
The theory was that the handkerchief may have been the offender's. And also, were there any stains on it to link it to Lorraine Benson. When I first became a forensic scientist, the only way you could type stains was to carry out blood grouping tests, and they didn't provide a lot of discrimination, and you needed a large amount of sample to get a result.
We've always been able to type blood, but DNA had not long been used as an investigative tool.
DNA profiling really only became routinely used in criminal cases in 1988, when it was used on the most serious cases, so murders, sexual assaults, and for testing blood, semen stains, and occasionally saliva.
The next stage, finding a vehicle, confirmed that a struggle had taken place. We've got evidence of a young woman going missing, matched the profile of other ladies that had been attacked in the area, and that there clearly had been a struggle. Not saying it was definitely linked, but it was justification to actually revisit all the information, all the evidence that Kingston Police had on the linked sexual attacks, but also to refocus the forensic laboratory on samples they'd taken, evidence they had forensically from the other cases in Kingston, and see if there was a link, whether it be fibre, saliva, DNA, blood, between the cases in Kingston and the evidence they'd found in Lorraine's case.
This possible connection with a local serial sex attacker is the police's best line of inquiry.
It gave more of a profile of who we were looking for, more of a description. We had a very vague description from house-to-house inquiries, but nothing much to go on. A shadow of a man.
Day breaks, and family liaison officer Jenny has sensitive questions for Mick and Lynn.
So I had to ask about Lorraine's personal life. Was she a promiscuous young lady? A very difficult question to ask in such trying times. What was her normal pattern of behaviour?
When the police put it together, she did everything right. When she left the party, she came with 2 other girls. They got on the train together through to Rains Park. She did everything right. She had company, she did this. When she was walking towards the traffic.
I was saying to myself, I can remember, my God, hope she's all right. Please let her be all right.
I didn't realise emotionally how intense it would be to take on board the distress of the parents.
Well, you can't believe you're living through the anxiety of maybe not seeing her again.
There was something terribly wrong here, and although I was really hopeful that we would find her injured or confused somewhere, in the back of my mind I knew, as Mick did, that perhaps the worst things could happen to her, and trying to not show that fear.
This is not a particularly well advertised pathway, and somebody who knew their way around would know about this place. I don't think it's somewhere you would stumble across being at the end of a road.
There's an alleyway that leads onto playing fields. I believe there's playing fields back onto a school. Very dense undergrowth and thick brambles. And by that time, police dogs were also part of the search party. And police dogs are brilliant. You give them a piece of clothing, they sniff it, they go off, they find what they have to find.
And it was during the search of this particular alleyway that Lorraine's body was found to my left by the school.
And the search team were led to where Lorraine's body was actually found hidden in brambles.
And she'd been covered by various bits of the foliage that were around. In every investigation of a missing person, when the body is found and it turns into a murder investigation, everything becomes a little more serious.
It's around 12 hours since Lorraine Benson disappeared, and police have found a body. They now need to inform her parents.
I was told that a body had been found, and the description of the body, a young girl, meets Lorraine's description and the clothing she was actually wearing, which wasn't much at that time. I then volunteered to go and tell the family that a body had been found and we suspect it to be Lorraine's.
And it was Inspector A.B. Benham and Jenny Wood.
Didn't know what to say, but they knew.
And when I opened the front door to her, I just had to look at her. I said, "You found her, haven't you?" And he said, "Yes." And I come in. I said to Lynn, "They've found her." And Lynn said, "Oh, thank God." And I said, "No, it's not good news."
One of the worst days of my career. Many a time I've been asked to actually call their houses and explain a loved one had died. I knew so many intimate things about her and the family, to then have to go and tell the family that actually we'd found a body. It's awful for them. What could I do? I didn't even say anything when I got there. They just took one look at me and I gave Lynn a hug.
This wasn't happening. I couldn't believe it. Not Lorraine.
I just remember Lynn froze to the spot. The tears just fell down her face and she was shaking, and Mick just started crying. No, oh Lynn. He was totally inconsolable. I mean, this was his baby girl. And Lynn just stood there, totally frozen to the spot and helpless. I felt I was intruding. I wanted to leave them to their own personal space. And I tried to made my excuses and said, "You really need time to be alone now." And bless them, they said, "No, you're part of this. Don't leave us now. We need you." That meant a lot to me, personally as well as professionally. But I could see they still needed time out. And I did what any good couple does. I went and made a cup of tea. It was probably the worst cup of tea I've ever made in my life.
He said, "Are you prepared to do an identification?" I said to Lynn, "I don't want you to see that." I said, "So I'll get on my own."
Mick Benson would have had to go to the hospital or mortuary and identify his daughter. Those of us who have never been in that situation can only imagine.
There was still a slight glimmer of hope. OK, there's a body. It still might not be Lorraine.
There's a window, 18 inches. When you're ready, tap it. The man the other side will pull the curtains. Of course, he pulled the curtains and there's Lorraine. But I've said many times, I looked at it and that wasn't my daughter. And I don't care how mawkish it sounds, that was just a shell. Her soul had gone. And this was it. It was such a feeling of relief in that respect, but not the pain that you were saying was to follow. I couldn't kiss her goodbye. Couldn't touch her because of DNA. And you could see she'd been in a fight.
She was one tough little cookie. She really was.
Without having gone through that as an individual, we can only imagine what it's like for families. I've seen the devastation that it's caused to the Benson family over the years.
I don't know how they got through that day. I don't know how they get through the week. I don't know how they get through life, knowing what's happened to lovely Lorraine. I can't really explain how they felt. I could only see how they were. And I wanted to be able to take some of that hurt away, and the only thing I could possibly do, perhaps it made me feel better, was just say to them, "We won't give in. We'll find the bastard."
When Lorraine is found, the first thing in is the preservation of the scene, that this complete alleyway would have been typed off at both ends. No one would have been able to come into here. When a police officer finds a body, they don't touch it. And then the forensic teams would come in and they would do what's necessary to preserve all forensic evidence And then they're put into a body bag and taken to the mortuary where the forensic examination continues. The circumstances of her going missing and the circumstances of her being found, it was proved at the post-mortem examination that Lorraine had indeed been murdered.
Injuries to Lorraine's body reveal that she fended off her attacker without being raped, before being strangled using a ligature.
A piece of rope was also found in the area where Lorraine Benson's body was located, and we investigated that type of rope.
Lorraine had some defensive bite marks on her left forearm.
The pathologist is the likely one to find things like the bruises from the teeth mark.
There were bite marks found on Lorraine Benson's left arm and her hand.
The inquiry, already intensive, became even more intensive, and we set about trying to find the person that had done this. There is someone out there that's committed a murder, and I think the worst case scenario is that another one would be committed. So we are dedicated in trying to find this person and get them off the streets.
Early on in the investigation, a couple of police officers have been tasked with looking through previous arrests in the whole area. Anybody that was either a rapist, who'd been charged and convicted, anybody who was a peeping Tom, a burglar, and just look at their profiles and see if any of those would match. And so, if you can imagine, hundreds and hundreds of names came into the system. It wasn't a computer system, it was a Rolodex system.
The police need to work through each and every record of potential perpetrators. It's a laborious and methodical process. But then something happens that changes the direction of the investigation.
There was a rape or attempted rape in the locality.
Your suspect was actually arrested only a couple of streets away from where Lorraine's body was found, and only a couple of streets away from where her final destination was.
The suspect is 19-year-old local man, John Dunn.
The officer in charge at Wimbledon decided that there was some kind of link. It was like a light had been switched on.
And it ticked enough boxes for him to be prioritised and brought to the very top of the list, rather than just one of hundreds of people that may meet the profile.
February the 2nd, 1989. Police have arrested John Dunn on suspicion of killing Lorraine Benson. They've got a long way to go before they can charge him with her murder.
At the time that we arrested him, he was a suspect, but the evidence in relation to the murder wasn't great. There was enough to talk to him about his movements. Initially, we didn't know. It was just another person who was being arrested for a murder and for another offence.
There'd been another attempted rape in the same area, Rains Park, and it turned out he'd broken into her house, breaking the French windows doors to get in, and he had a ligature.
Because he met the profile, it justified interviewing him and, if necessary, arresting him to get a DNA sample.
A blood sample was obtained from him, which was then submitted for DNA profiling.
With John Dunn in custody for other crimes, he's interviewed further by officers.
John Dunn initially never admitted anything to do with Lorraine, no meetings.
Fingerprints, clothing and DNA are taken to forensically compare to evidence from previous crime scenes.
A blood sample was obtained from John Dunn. Didn't match the rape series in the Kingston area that was also under investigation at that time.
Forensics turn their attention to other evidence.
The car was submitted to the laboratory.
There were actually marks on the external part in the dust of the vehicle.
I initially looked at them to see if there was anything that matched the fabric weave of Lorraine's coat, but there were some zigzag lines in the dust, which at first were a bit of a mystery. But eventually I realised that they could have been made by the teeth on the zip of her coat, and I carried out some trial experiments that confirmed that.
They identified the jacket that Lorraine was wearing, and also a jacket that was taken from John Dunn's home.
Large numbers of those particular zips would have been produced, but it did corroborate that there'd been a struggle by the side of the car.
It had already been proposed by the exhibits officer to asked for him to provide a dental impression where you bite into some goo, same as you do if you go to a dentist to have a brace fitted or something. That was submitted to the laboratory.
There were bite marks found on Lorraine Benson's left arm and her hand. They were examined by a forensic odontologist who confirmed that they were consistent with John Dunn's dental impressions.
With some useful results out of forensic investigations, officers couldn't have hoped for a better result than the next development.
It was the very early days of DNA profiling for the Met Police. The first test on the handkerchief provided a DNA result from the nasal mucus. It was a really exciting result because it was the first time we'd obtained a DNA profile from nasal mucus. We finally established Lorraine Benson's profile on the 3rd of February, and that showed that the blood was a match with her, but the nasal mucus wasn't. Further DNA tests were carried out and they confirmed that Dunn matched the nasal mucus profile, and the figure for that was around 1 in 1.5 million for the white Caucasian population.
His DNA was confirmed as the DNA on the handkerchief that also had Lorraine's blood on it.
The Forensic Science Service gave us such good evidence. For the first time ever, nasal debris or mucus on the handkerchief had been used to identify somebody. That had never been done before anywhere.
Today it might be considered fairly routine, but at the time it was a double first to get a DNA result from an unusual sample to help solve the murder. And it was the first murder that DNA profiling had helped to solve in the Metropolitan Police Laboratory.
So it was extraordinary, and it showed how dedicated the whole team were, which were the forensics as well as the police.
The whole inquiry, looking back on it, is an amazing amount of teamwork by the various bodies that were involved. From the inquiry team with which I was involved, the Forensic Science Services, but back to the first actions at the scene of a crime initiated by Inspector Henry and his team. If they hadn't done that, we never would have had those articles in evidence. It's always referred to by us as the first steps at a scene of a crime. And properly done, it helped to solve this case.
The compelling evidence enabled the police to put pressure on John Dunn to tell the truth.
He was still denying everything. They had the evidence they'd picked up, he's still denying that.
Several times he was brought back to the police station for further interviews to put further allegations to him or further questions, further inconsistencies.
And when they were talking, suddenly he said, I do seem to remember a blonde girl.
DC Gary Shorrocks and his partner have built a level of trust with Dunn which pays off.
During one of those interviews, he handed the police officer a written confession that he'd pre-prepared, actually admitting that the handkerchief was his and it was Lorraine's blood on there.
With police keen to let Mick and Lynn know of any developments, an officer calls straight away.
I got a phone call and it's Bernie Davis. He said, I think we got him, Mick. I said, but he said, I'm 110% sure we've got him. I said, well, that's good enough for me, Bernie. There was never a doubt in my mind that they would get him.
So he admitted actually being in contact with Lorraine, and that later further led then to him actually admitting and pleading guilty at court to her murder.
The Bensons were informed fully throughout of what was going on, and we took the family to court for the trial. I was keeping an eye on Mick Benson, who was in the gallery upstairs, and when he saw John Dunn, he did what I think any father would have done. He got out of his seat. I could see his fist was clenched. If he could have got hold of him, he would have liked to do some serious damage to that man. It was explained at John Dunn's trial that, by the prosecutor, that she had in fact been murdered by strangulation. A ligature had been used. A piece of rope was found near her body, which matched some of the marks found on Lorraine, but could never be proven to be the piece of rope that had actually been used.
John Dunn had denied being involved in Lorraine's murder, but the overwhelming nature of the DNA, I think, played a part in him eventually pleading guilty at court.
I hope that the Benson family felt that something had been done to honour their daughter's memory, that the person who'd done this to her was there before them and admitting to it in a court of law. And then the judge did his part in sentencing him to life imprisonment. I think John Dunn pleaded guilty as a result of the wealth of evidence, not just in his confession, but the forensic evidence and the witness evidence compiled by a fantastic team of police officers, detectives and forensic teams. Everybody played their part. He wouldn't be where he is today if it wasn't for that kind of work. Mick and Lynn Benson, you can imagine, it's not the end for them. They got the rest of their lives to live knowing that this person has murdered their daughter for no reason other than his own personal satisfaction.
If only Lorraine had been lazy, oh, I'll wait here and get the car. If only Peter had been there. And if only the big one there, if only the scum wasn't out there.
You read these stories in the paper. You think, you know, it never happened to us. It did.